Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission, as always, is to give you that ultimate knowledge shortcut. We help you get genuinely informed without, feeling the crushing weight of information overload.
And today we're taking on a huge subject.
A massive one. 5 millennia of human history.
It sounds incredibly daunting, right? I mean, history so often feels like a required course,
Yeah,
this massive wall of dates you're just supposed to memorize.
exactly. But we found a source that completely flips that model on its head.
We did. We've been immersed in the Ultimate History Buff Challenge. Over 600 quiz questions for curious history lovers by Bill O'Neill.
And what immediately struck us about this book, and it was published just earlier this year, is that it sidesteps that typical, really dry overview. It doesn't lecture at all, it challenges.
It really does. This isn't a textbook. It's more like an interactive puzzle. It transforms learning history into this ongoing, really fascinating competition with yourself.
Okay, so the key insight we're trying to extract here is how does a quiz format, something you usually associate with, trivia and surface knowledge?
Right, Trivial Pursuit.
Yeah, exactly. How does that actually lead to a deep, comprehensive understanding of the past?
So for you, the learner, we're going to pull apart the mechanisms that make this resource genuinely educational, but also relentlessly fun.
Let's see how a set of questions can be a true deep dive in disguise.
Well, let's start with the format itself. Most trivia books, they just feel recycled. Surface level.
Sure, they ask who was the first president or something like, what year did the Titanic sink?
Basic recall. That's it.
I still struggle a bit with the idea that a quiz book, even a really good one, can offer a deep dive. I mean, isn't trivia just a series of disconnected data points? What's actually in here to force synthesis instead of just recall?
That is the critical question. And this book answers it by blending genuine breadth with very specific depth, and it does it at the same time.
Okay, depth. What does that mean here?
The depth comes from the nuance that's actually embedded in the questions.
Yeah.
You aren't just asked what happened, but maybe why it mattered, or what specific, often overlooked detail really defines an event.
So give us an example of that. We know it covers the essentials, ancient, medieval, Renaissance, all the modern periods, but what does going beyond the major figures actually look like in one of these quizzes?
Okay, think about the Renaissance. Everyone knows the major artists, right? Powerful families like the Medici.
Of course.
This book goes a level deeper. It might test you not on who invented the printing press, but on what specific, localized bureaucratic need in 15th century Germany made that tech immediately explode.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. That requires you to understand cultural context, economics, logistics, not just a name and a year.
So that's a whole different kind of recall. It's not just recognizing a fact, it's understanding its roots, its implications.
Absolutely. And the structural variety just reinforces this. You're constantly moving between multiple choice, true, false, and then standard open-ended questions.
So your brain can't get lazy.
Exactly. That constant shift means you can't settle into that passive reading mode you get with a history book.
Yeah.
It forces active participation, and that is so key for long-term retention.
And what's really fascinating to me is how the material is structured to resist that linear timeline we all get taught in school.
That's where the real interconnectedness comes in. The quizzes, they're designed to gently force your brain to jump between what seem like totally disconnected timelines.
How so?
Well, one question might take you into, say, the military supply chains of Ptolemaic Egypt as it was declining. And the very next question could catapult you into Cold War intelligence operations in the 20th century.
Now, hold on. That's the historical leap we talked about. How on earth does a pharaoh connect to a modern spy?
The connection is in the underlying structures.
Yeah.
Structures of power, of bureaucracy.
Okay.
The source material challenges you to compare how these massive ancient empires managed information, how they secured borders, enforced loyalty.
Which are the very roots of modern statecraft and intelligence agencies.
Precisely. It's testing your ability to spot patterns of cause and effect that span centuries. It makes history feel less like these vertical silos of time and more like horizontal currents.
So you realize that a problem an Egyptian scribe was trying to solve has echoes in a government office today.
That's it, exactly.
Speaking of all those different eras, let's talk about the span of this thing. 5,000 years. That's a monstrous amount of history to cover without it just collapsing under its own weight.
It is.
So how does the structure keep that massive chronological spread from the ancient Near East to our own digital era from just completely overwhelming you?
It works because history is organized here not as one dense chronological mass, but into these distinct layered turning points in human development.
And crucially, the content goes way beyond just political and military trivia.
Oh, absolutely. That balance is essential to making history feel vivid.
Yeah.
Yes, you will definitely cover the great battles and the big political figures, but you'll also be tested on things like the ancient architecture and the symbolism of Egyptian dynasties.
Or the evolution of writing systems like cuneiform. I also saw it gets into social elements.
It does. For instance, there are questions about Roman civilian fashion or the everyday customs of medieval guilds woven right in.
And that inclusion of the cultural and social stuff is vital, I think. It reminds you that history is made up of actual people, not just kings and generals.
But the real structural genius is the thematic breakdown. That's what makes the learning so non-linear and lively. It reflects how curiosity-driven exploration actually happens in the real world.
Right, it leans into that natural process. You aren't forced to memorize page after page. You can just dive into an area that interests you right away. I think the book has over 34 quizzes, each with a different focus.
And you can see that thematic structure laid out so beautifully. If you're fascinated by the foundations, there's a dedicated ancient civilizations quiz.
Which tests you specifically across Mesopotamia, Egypt, Greece, Persia, your classic deep dive.
But maybe you want to skip ahead. You can jump straight to the revolutions quiz.
And that covers everything from political overthrows, like the French Revolution, to these huge scientific eras, like the Industrial Revolution. It makes you compare them.
It does. And for anyone who loves military history, there's a World Wars quiz that is raty. Well, it's described as rigorously detailed and challenging for both World War I and World War II.
So it's not just asking about the big outcomes.
No, it's digging into treaties, minor campaigns, technological advancements, the real nuts and bolts.
But I have to say, my favorite quiz, and this is what truly elevates the book for me, is the odd historical facts quiz. This section is just dedicated entirely to those forgotten, strange, surprising events that most textbooks just ignore.
It really highlights that history is often stranger than fiction. You might learn about a forgotten currency used just for trading salt in medieval Africa.
Or the real-life origins of a mythological creature that was tied to some 17th century public panic.
And those little nuggets, they're often the most memorable, the ones that really stick.
And adding to that whole immersive experience are the illustrations in every chapter. It just elevates it beyond plain text and helps cement those visual details we were talking about.
Okay, let's shift focus a bit. This is where it gets really critical for you, the listener. Application. We've established how the book works structurally, but why should you care about a history quiz book?
Right.
Because this presents knowledge as exploration, not just rote memorization.
That's the utility argument. But I do struggle with the idea that focusing on multiple choice answers respects intelligence. How does this format actively encourage critical thought rather than just fact-checking?
By setting up traps and forcing you to make connections. The critical thinking isn't just about giving the right answer. It's about evaluating why the 3 wrong answers are historically plausible, but still contextually incorrect.
So the distractors are smart.
Very smart. The questions are often framed to challenge common historical misconceptions. So if you get a question wrong, it's not just a failed fact. It reveals a gap in your understanding of the bigger picture.
Which makes the book incredibly versatile. I mean, it's ideal for lifelong learners who want to keep their minds sharp.
But also for students and teachers. It encourages active learning and gives you that immediate feedback.
And if you just love trivia, you'll find this addictively challenging.
And because of its vast historical coverage, that whole 5,000-year span, it bridges generations so well. It's a fantastic tool for a family game night.
I can see that. You could have a teenager prepping for a world history class.
A parent who loves historical podcasts, and maybe a grandparent who actually lived through some of that mid-century history, all competing or even collaborating.
Everyone finds a foothold and everyone gets challenged.
Exactly.
That intergenerational piece is a great feature, but for me, the most underrated aspect is what we're calling the gateway effect.
Yes, this is the ultimate goal of any good deep dive, to spark more curiosity. We know from reader feedback that people often report looking up events, leaders, ancient cultures they had either forgotten or, never even knew existed.
Right after failing a quiz question about them.
That's the moment.
The moment you realize you couldn't identify the economic fallout of, say, the Battle of Cannae, you open a new tab and start researching. You aren't just memorizing, you're actively engaging with the gaps in your knowledge.
And that leads to a much deeper self-directed research path. This book doesn't lecture, it invites participation. And that is the most powerful learning catalyst there is.
So ultimately, the value proposition of the Ultimate History Buff Challenge is that it's much more than just a quiz book. It's a multi-layered, deeply engaging journey.
And it respects your intelligence by continually pushing the boundaries of what you think you know. It's endlessly replayable, too, because that mix of breadth and depth keeps the challenge fresh every time.
And this constant engagement, it ultimately sharpens your long-term recall and how you apply that knowledge. The book really does challenge that idea that history is something settled and fixed on a neat linear timeline.
Hmm. It constantly forces you to revisit what you thought you remembered.
And it reinforces how interconnected every historical decision truly is.
It proves that we don't really absorb history sequentially. We learn through these curiosity-driven leaps, these thematic connections. It encourages that mental agility to see how the decisions made by a Persian emperor might echo in the strategic planning of a modern superpower.
So, if the structure of this book provides a model for successful, curiosity-driven learning, what is the most surprising historical leap, that connection between an ancient cultural custom and a modern digital phenomenon, that you will explore next?
That's what we leave you with today.
We encourage you to keep diving deep.